On June 14, 2022, deep inside the labyrinthine tunnels of Gaza, an operation unfolded that would send ripples across the intelligence world. A Hamas gunman named Fahad Mohisan, notorious for orchestrating deadly ambushes, vanished without a trace. His fate was sealed not by bullets or bombs, but by something stranger, a pigeon drone carrying hidden sensors and explosives. In the half-light of the tunnel, whispers spread among fighters. Had their trusted safe haven been compromised? Had the walls themselves betrayed them? The answer lay in the ingenuity of Mossad, whose operation would blur the lines between war and technological espionage. For years, these tunnels had served as arteries of Hamas power, carved beneath Gaza like veins beneath human skin. They were sanctuaries for weapons, corridors for kidnappers, and stages for ambushes. Yet this time, the hunter became the hunted. An explosion, precise and surgical, echoed in the underground labyrinth. Dust and screams followed. When the haze cleared, Fahad Mohisan was gone. All that remained was silence, and questions that would echo through intelligence corridors in Tel Aviv, Doha, Ankara, and Washington. Who had designed such a bizarre method of killing? Why had Mossad chosen this moment, this tunnel, this man? The world would soon learn that this was no ordinary strike. It was not about eliminating a single man, but about sending a message across borders. No tunnel is too deep, no hideout too secret, no militant too protected. For Israel, it was vengeance wrapped in innovation. For Hamas, it was terror inside their most trusted refuge. And for global intelligence agencies, it was a chilling case study in how 21st century assassinations blur the frontier between technology, theater, and death. But beneath the ground in Gaza, the first whispers began. Was it truly Mossad? Or had betrayal come from within? The killing of Fahad Mohisan did not remain confined to the choking darkness of Gaza's tunnels. News of his death spread with unnerving speed, crossing checkpoints, borders, and airwaves, before Hamas officials could even confirm the details. To the ordinary eye, it seemed like another casualty in a conflict already drowned in blood and reprisal. Yet within diplomatic channels and military headquarters, alarm bells rang. This was not a crude detonation or a random skirmish. This was a precision strike that spoke of intelligence mastery, technological experimentation, and political calculation. It was the kind of operation that carried the fingerprints of Mossad, surgical, inventive, and cloaked in plausible deniability. For Israel, Mohisan's elimination was more than retribution. It was a surgical removal of a man accused of orchestrating kidnappings, supplying weapons from Iran, and plotting attacks against border communities. His name had long appeared on wanted lists, flagged not only by Israel but quietly tracked by Western agencies. For Hamas, his death carried symbolic weight, cutting into morale within the militant networks that depended on his leadership inside the tunnels. Yet the consequences stretched far beyond Gaza. The United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, nations balancing fragile diplomatic ties with both Hamas and Israel, were forced to weigh whether this strike would reignite broader hostilities. At its core, the death of Mohisan symbolized the high stakes of modern clandestine warfare. A single strike, executed with chilling precision, had the power to collapse ceasefire negotiations, redraw alliances, and escalate into a regional firestorm. The pigeon drone was not merely a weapon, it was a message that nowhere, not even the Earth itself, could shield a target from the reach of modern intelligence services. Who had conceived such an audacious plan? Who had transformed a harmless bird into a winged instrument of death? Was it truly Mossad engineers in Tel Aviv, or had another power quietly tested its own prototype in the shadows of Gaza? Why had Fahad Mohisan, among so many figures in Hamas, been chosen for elimination at this precise moment? Did his death protect Israeli citizens, or did it serve a deeper purpose, one hidden within secret agreements and intelligence rivalries? Could it have been a warning to Tehran, whose weapons often found their way into Hamas tunnels? Why now, after months of fragile truces and tense negotiations, would such an operation be unleashed? Was the intention to cripple Hamas's underground networks, or to provoke them into rash retaliation? Who among his own comrades had betrayed him, revealing his movements and hiding places? Were they coerced, paid, or simply fearful of Mossad's reach? And perhaps the most chilling question: if the sanctity of the tunnels could be violated, where could Hamas leaders feel safe again? Every answer opened new doubts. Every doubt fed paranoia. In this theater of shadows, truth was rarely simple. It was layered, buried, and guarded by silence. Fahad Mohsin was born in 1984 in the crowded district of Khan Yunis, a place where poverty and politics were inseparable. His childhood unfolded beneath the constant roar of conflict, where Israeli incursions, military checkpoints, and curfews defined daily life. His father worked irregular shifts as a laborer, crossing into Israel when permits allowed, while his mother struggled to hold the family together through long nights of blackouts and shortages. For young Fahad, survival meant endurance, and endurance meant learning early how to live in the shadows of war. Neighbors would later recall him as a boy who rarely smiled. While other children chased footballs in alleyways, Fahad preferred listening to the elders recount stories of martyrs and battles. Books were scarce, yet pamphlets distributed by political factions found their way into his hands. Each one promised resistance, dignity, and liberation. By the time he entered his teenage years, he had memorized speeches from local leaders and could recite Quranic verses tied to the idea of sacrifice. What might have been an ordinary youth was steadily forged into one defined by grievance and defiance. His school teachers noted his sharpness, but also his volatility. In classrooms damaged by past bombardments, Fahad's essays carried a different tone than his peers. He wrote not of dreams, but of revenge, not of futures, but of reclamation. At home, hunger sometimes gnawed louder than ambition. The family's meager meals and reliance on food aid only deepened his sense that dignity could never be found under occupation. Each humiliation planted another seed of resistance. By the late 1990s, the atmosphere in Khan Yunis grew harsher. Clashes intensified, funerals multiplied, and teenagers began disappearing into underground cells of resistance groups. Fahad watched older boys transform into fighters, armed with smuggled rifles or crude explosives. The line between childhood and militancy blurred. When his older cousin was killed during a street clash with Israeli forces, Fahad carried the body at the funeral procession. Those who walked beside him whispered that his silence on that day was heavier than any cry. The boy who rarely smiled now carried within him the certainty of a chosen path. By the time he reached adulthood, Fahad Mohsin's ideology had crystallized into an unyielding worldview. He saw himself as a soldier in a divine struggle, where every act of defiance against Israel carried both spiritual and political weight. Friends and associates described him as deeply disciplined, often rising before dawn for prayer, and refusing to indulge in the small comforts that others clung to in Gaza's constrained existence. He spoke sparingly, preferring silence to idle chatter, but when he did speak, his words carried a sharpness that revealed both conviction and calculation. Despite the rigidity of his beliefs, Fahad harbored quirks that marked him as unusual among his peers. He kept notebooks filled with diagrams of tunnel layouts and sketches of weapons, treating them as both practical plans and private obsessions. Unlike many militants who displayed bravado in public, Fahad preferred secrecy and ritual. He was known to pluck at prayer beads incessantly, even in tense moments before operations. He distrusted laughter, once remarking to a comrade that joy was a distraction from destiny. This aura of solemnity made him respected by some and feared by others, for he gave the impression of a man consumed by a mission larger than life itself. At the same time, he exhibited a meticulous care for appearances. His clothes, though simple, were always neatly pressed. His weapons were maintained with near-clinical precision, and he demanded the same of anyone under his command. Those who knew him in private described a man with few indulgences: black tea without sugar, long walks at night along the outskirts of Khan Yunis, and an obsession with listening to recordings of speeches from Hamas leaders and Iranian clerics. These habits fused with his ideology, building a figure whose life seemed permanently tethered to resistance. Within the militant networks of Gaza, names carried power, and Fahad Mohsin accumulated several. Among his comrades, he was often called Al-Tafahum, the interpreter, a reference to his ability to translate ideology into practical strategy. Others referred to him as the Mole, a nod to his obsession with tunnels and subterranean warfare. Within Hamas propaganda, however, he was elevated as Lion of the Depths, a symbol meant to inspire recruits who believed the tunnels beneath Gaza were sacred arteries of resistance. Each nickname reflected both his reputation and his own carefully curated self-image. Fahad himself leaned into these titles with deliberate pride. He saw the tunnels not only as military structures, but as a metaphor for survival. Dark, hidden, and resilient. He would tell younger fighters that the earth was their shield, and that disappearing beneath it was proof of defiance. To some, his confidence bordered on arrogance. He often referred to himself in the third person when giving orders, reinforcing his aura of command. In his own writings, discovered later by intelligence analysts, he likened himself to historic figures of resistance, crafting a narrative where his life was inseparable from the destiny of his people. The transition from disillusioned youth to militant operative was not sudden for Fahad Mohissan, but it unfolded with grim inevitability. In the early 2000s, as the Second Intifada erupted, he found himself drawn into the orbit of Hamas recruiters who roamed Gaza's neighborhoods. These men, cloaked in secrecy yet revered by the community, offered not merely weapons, but identity, purpose, and belonging. Fahad's quiet intensity and his cousin's death made him an ideal candidate. By 2002, he was assisting in small-scale operations, smuggling leaflets, carrying messages, and monitoring Israeli troop movements. Each act brought him deeper into a clandestine world that demanded loyalty above all else. It was in these years that Fahad began his immersion into the political dimensions of militancy. Hamas, unlike other factions, offered both governance and resistance, embedding its fighters within schools, mosques, and charities. Fahad worked briefly as a volunteer in community organizations tied to the movement, where he distributed food and coordinated aid. But these charitable roles were a mask. Beneath them lay secret meetings, where he was introduced to weapons training, tunnel construction, and the mechanics of explosives. In his mind, the political and the militant became inseparable, each feeding into the other. By 2005, his role shifted from supporting player to active participant. He began accompanying senior operatives into the tunnels, learning how to move weapons and people beneath the soil. He also engaged in propaganda work, speaking at small gatherings where he urged youths to see resistance as both duty and destiny. His transformation was not just physical, but psychological. He adopted the posture of a soldier, the cadence of a preacher, and the caution of a spy. The boy who had once written essays filled with revenge now lived those words in the smoke and silence of clandestine warfare. Fahad Mohissan's early steps into violence soon escalated into direct confrontations with law and order. In 2006, not long after Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, he was arrested by Palestinian Authority security forces during a sweep against Hamas operatives. The charge was possession of weapons and conspiracy to commit attacks against rival Fatah elements. Though briefly imprisoned, he was released after weeks of tense negotiations and violent protests, a sign of how divided the Palestinian territories had already become. This incident marked his first brush with formal detention, and it hardened him further against what he saw as collaborators obstructing the path of resistance. By 2008, Israeli intelligence had taken notice of his name. Reports linked him to the smuggling of rifles through Rafah tunnels and to a failed attempt to fire mortars at an Israeli border post. An Israeli raid in Khan Yunis targeted a safe house where he was rumored to be hiding, but he escaped through a narrow tunnel shaft only minutes before soldiers breached the compound. The escape added to his growing reputation within Hamas, a figure who could evade even the most sophisticated surveillance. For Israel, it confirmed his status as a rising threat, whose capture would not be simple. Local records from this period describe a string of minor arrests by Palestinian police, none of which resulted in long sentences. Each time, Fahad returned to the streets more radicalized, more careful, and more determined. He learned how to disappear into Gaza's dense neighborhoods, how to speak little and trust less, and how to turn interrogations into opportunities to measure his enemy's strategies. These early clashes with authority, though relatively small compared to what followed, laid the foundation for his image as a man beyond reach, a militant whose defiance seemed to sharpen with every attempted restraint. In 2009, Fahad Mohsin's path briefly intersected with prolonged imprisonment. Captured during a joint operation by rival Palestinian factions, he was accused of plotting assassinations against Fatah loyalists. He spent months in a detention facility where, according to his later claims, he endured brutal interrogations and systematic torture. He spoke of beatings with cables, prolonged solitary confinement, and psychological pressure designed to break his loyalty to Hamas. Independent verification of these claims remains elusive, yet within Gaza, his account became legend. He was cast as the fighter who withstood the torment of traitors, refusing to betray his comrades or abandon the cause. These months of imprisonment served to radicalize him further. He emerged leaner, angrier, and more convinced that his struggle was divinely sanctioned. To younger recruits, he embodied resilience under oppression. To his enemies, he became a hardened militant with a vendetta not only against Israel, but against any Palestinian faction that sought compromise. The ordeal etched into his mind a vision of himself, as both martyr-in-waiting and survivor of ordeals, meant to extinguish him. From this point onward, Fahad's rhetoric grew sharper, his operations more ruthless, and his place within Hamas increasingly central. Torture, real or embellished, had carved his mythology. By 2010, Fahad Mohsin had fully immersed himself in the militant landscape of Gaza, and his role within Hamas solidified. No longer a low-level courier or foot soldier, he became a strategist embedded in the organization's armed wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades. His focus was tunneling, both as a tactical innovation and as a symbol of resistance. He championed the idea that the subterranean network was not simply infrastructure, but the very lifeline of Hamas's survival. Under his guidance, cells began to expand these underground arteries, connecting safe houses, smuggling routes, and hidden storage facilities. His technical obsession with design gave him a reputation as both fighter and engineer. But Fahad's ambitions were not confined solely to Hamas. Intelligence sources suggest he briefly entertained ties with smaller splinter groups in Gaza that sought to outdo Hamas in radical rhetoric. Groups aligned with Islamic Jihad courted him, offering opportunities to broaden his influence. Yet Fahad's pragmatism kept him tethered to Hamas, which offered resources, structure, and political clout. He rejected overtures to defect, though he occasionally used these contacts to broker weapons deals or to secure explosives when Hamas channels were constrained. In this way, he operated as both loyalist and opportunist. By 2012, Fahad's prominence grew enough that he was tasked with organizing recruitment drives. He mentored younger militants, teaching them not only how to handle rifles, but how to navigate the moral narrative of resistance. His speeches were filled with metaphors of the earth protecting its sons, tunnels sheltering the faithful, and martyrdom as an inevitable badge of honor. His rising profile made him indispensable within Hamas's infrastructure, yet it also painted a target on his back. Both Israeli and Palestinian intelligence services began cataloging his movements more carefully, aware that his influence extended far beyond the tunnels he so carefully guarded. By 2013, Mohsin oversaw a sophisticated smuggling ring that funneled weapons through Rafah, using clandestine shafts and commercial convoys as cover. He coordinated transfers with Sinai intermediaries, negotiated bribes, and maintained ledgers mapping each crate, handoff, and payment, precise records. He expanded into kidnappings, targeting businessmen and rival commanders to extract ransom and leverage. Reconnaissance teams abducted targets near marketplaces, moved them through tunnels, and kept them in fortified safe houses. Negotiations were brutal. Families paid or publicly witnessed harsh reprisals. Killings escalated as Mohsin sanctioned targeted executions to eliminate perceived traitors and rivals. He approved drive-by shootings, improvised explosive attacks, and close-quarters ambushes within narrow alleys. Each act was documented by his aides and circulated to cement fear, projecting ruthlessness. Smuggling routes diversified into electronics and clandestine drones sourced through intermediaries in Lebanon and Iran. Mohsin sought components disguised as agricultural imports, routed via Cyprus freight and Gaza docks. These materials enabled surveillance, remote detonation, innovations such as pigeon drone prototypes. His network recruited engineers, local mechanics, and disgruntled smugglers, paying in cash and protection. Safe houses contained makeshift workshops where silicon molds, microcontrollers, and motors were assembled. Trials occurred at night, with failures discarded and successful prototypes kept under strict secrecy. Kidnappings funded operations and killings enforced discipline. Mohisan ordered summary executions for suspected collaborators, displaying bodies as warnings. He cultivated informants in marketplaces and ports, rewarding tips with cash, converting ordinary vendors into reluctant eyes and ears for his network. International intelligence reports began to note patterns: shipments logged under false manifests, cell phone metadata linking coordinators, and sudden spikes in ransom payments. By 2014, foreign services flagged Mohisan as a transnational criminal and security threat, elevating him beyond local notoriety. He became a prize for rival agencies, ensuring collaboration, surveillance, and an inevitability that would later ultimately seal his fate. Between 2014 and 2017, Fahad Mohisan's activities hardened into a timeline of escalating violence, each incident meticulously plotted. On March 12, 2014, Israeli intelligence intercepted chatter about an attempted arms convoy. The shipment, hidden in crates of medical supplies, was traced back to Mohisan's network. Days later, militants ambushed an Israeli patrol near Rafah, killing 2 soldiers before vanishing into tunnel shafts that bore his designs. This attack confirmed his operational fingerprints: precision planning, ruthless execution, and seamless retreat into the underground. By July 2015, his influence widened. On the 8th of that month, a businessman accused of collaborating with Israel disappeared from Khan Yunis. Weeks later, his body was found on the outskirts, blindfolded, wrists bound, and marked with execution-style wounds. Leaflets distributed afterward carried a chilling message: traitors, feed the earth. Local whispers pointed to Mohisan's command, but no one dared speak openly. This pattern of abductions enforced absolute loyalty while instilling deep paranoia. In 2016, intelligence dossiers recorded Mohisan's orchestration of a tunnel raid that reached an Israeli kibbutz. On February 19th, militants tunneled beneath the border, planting explosives before retreating. The explosives detonated hours later, damaging infrastructure and sparking panic. Though casualties were limited, the sophistication of the operation underscored his engineering expertise. That same year, a foiled shipment of Iranian-made rockets traced through Sinai confirmed his logistical ties to Tehran's shadow networks. The final marker came on November 2, 2017, when a rival commander within Hamas was killed by a roadside bomb. While officially blamed on Israel, insiders whispered of Mohisan's hand. His ambition and paranoia had reached lethal heights, turning even allies into expendable obstacles. Each incident stacked against him, elevating his status as both Hamas asset and Mossad target. By 2018, Fahad Mohisan's name was no longer whispered solely in Gaza's alleyways and tunnels. It had surfaced in the offices of Interpol, in classified CIA briefings, and in Mossad dossiers marked priority. His activities, smuggling, kidnappings, assassinations, and tunnel warfare, had transcended local militancy and entered the realm of international threat. Israel formally designated him a high-value target, citing his role in multiple cross-border attacks and his suspected coordination with Iranian Quds Force operatives. Within months, American and European intelligence services began monitoring his financial dealings, tracing ransom money funneled through Cyprus banks and into shadow accounts in Doha. For Hamas, Mohisan was indispensable. He was one of the architects of the subterranean system that shielded their leadership and weapon stockpiles from Israeli surveillance. His growing stature made him both an asset and a liability. The more he achieved, the more he attracted attention. By 2019, Israel had placed him on its black dossier of operatives marked for neutralization. His profile highlighted not only his tactical innovations, but also his unpredictability. His willingness to target rivals within Gaza had made him dangerous even to Hamas's internal cohesion. The United Nations, pressured by Israeli diplomacy, quietly circulated reports linking Mohisan to arms smuggling rings that violated international embargoes. Western intelligence agencies debated whether to treat him as a terrorist mastermind or a criminal kingpin. Either designation ensured surveillance. Drones hovered more frequently over Khan Yunis, Analysts combed through intercepted calls, and agents mapped the labyrinth of tunnels believed to house him. Yet Mohisan adapted, constantly changing hideouts, using couriers instead of phones, and relying on coded notes burned after reading. By 2020, his notoriety rivaled that of senior Hamas commanders. He was no longer a local militant, but a figure woven into the larger tapestry of Middle Eastern conflict. Israeli media described him as the ghost beneath Gaza, while international security forums debated how to neutralize a man whose sanctuary lay underground. His presence on most wanted lists signaled inevitability. He was no longer a question of if, but when. Every tunnel he designed, every shipment he arranged, moved him closer to the crosshairs of the world's most sophisticated intelligence agency. Between 2020 and 2021, a series of attempts to eliminate Fahad Mohisan unfolded like chapters in a covert war. On January 17, 2020, Israeli drones targeted a suspected safe house in Khan Yunis, unleashing precision-guided munitions. The strike leveled the building, but Mohisan emerged unscathed, having shifted to another tunnel shaft only hours earlier. Local propaganda painted it as divine protection, while Mossad analysts marked it as a narrow failure. Later that year, whispers of a more subtle attempt surfaced. On July 3, 2020, reports emerged of Hamas operatives poisoned after consuming tainted supplies smuggled through Rafah. Intelligence circles speculated that Mohisan had been the intended target, yet he survived by refusing the communal meal. This incident deepened his paranoia. He insisted on separate rations inspected by trusted aides and refused even water offered by outsiders. Survival, once a matter of tunnels and tactics, became a matter of suspicion. In 2021, the campaign grew more daring. On March 29th, a drone disguised as a weather monitoring device descended over southern Gaza. Its mission was to track Mohisan's movements through heat signatures. When Hamas discovered it, propaganda outlets framed it as proof of Israel's desperation. Yet internal reports suggested that the drone had come within meters of capturing vital imagery of Mohisan's hidden chambers. Mossad was tightening its grip. The boldest attempt came on December 11, 2021. Intelligence indicated that Mohisan would attend a clandestine meeting near Rafah with tunnel engineers. As he exited a vehicle, a concealed explosive device detonated beneath the road. The blast killed 2 associates but left Mohisan staggering away, injured yet alive. Hamas hailed his escape as miraculous, while Israeli officials remained silent. The message, however, was clear. Each failure was narrowing the margin for his survival. Every attempt reinforced his myth as untouchable, but it also signaled inevitability. With every close call, Mossad refined its methods, mapping his routines, measuring his paranoia, and preparing for the moment when technology, timing, and secrecy would converge. For Mohisan, each dawn brought the same haunting truth. His days were numbered. By early 2022, inevitability hung over Fahad Mohisan like a shadow that never lifted. He lived beneath the earth, moving from chamber to chamber, yet the sense of pursuit was inescapable. Every noise in the tunnel walls became a possible breach, every flicker of light a suspected drone. His survival, once attributed to cunning, now seemed borrowed time measured in days rather than years. Mossad's patience was legendary, and history had shown that those who escaped once, twice, even 3 times, were eventually cornered. Hamas operatives whispered that Mohisan had grown more restless. He distrusted even his closest circle, suspecting spies in every handshake. The failed strikes had not weakened Mossad's resolve but sharpened it, proving that each operation was rehearsal for the final act. Analysts in Tel Aviv quietly spoke of him not as if eliminated, but when eliminated. The underground maze that had protected him for a decade was becoming his coffin. Fate seemed scripted, the conclusion foregone, the hunter and hunted destined to meet in one final decisive encounter. In the cold calculus of intelligence work, Mohisan's death was no longer speculation. It was a certainty awaiting execution. The struggle that shaped Fahad Mohisan cannot be separated from the broader conflict that defined Gaza. Since the creation of Israel in 1948, cycles of war, displacement, and resistance have forged identities in blood and exile. Gaza became both prison and battleground, a strip of land where every child grew beneath the shadow of occupation. By the late 20th century, Hamas emerged not only as a militant faction, but as a political movement, filling voids left by fractured governance. Its ideology fused religion with resistance, presenting itself as both protector and avenger. In this environment, men like Mohisan were not outliers, they were inevitable products. The wars of 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014 burned Gaza into the global consciousness. Each conflict left homes reduced to rubble, infrastructure shattered, and funerals that outnumbered weddings. These wars did not merely scar the land, they deepened the sense of entrapment. International aid flowed in, but blockades and embargoes strangled economic life. For Hamas, this hardship became a political weapon, proof that resistance was the only response to suffocation. Mohisan's rise coincided with this cycle of destruction and resilience, his tunnel network serving as both military strategy and symbol of survival under siege. Sectarian divides across the Middle East also fed the flames. The Sunni-Shia rivalry, Iran's sponsorship of militant groups, and the fracture between Hamas and Fatah ensured Gaza remained a pressure point. Each escalation, each Israeli retaliation, and each ceasefire collapse added another layer to the endless spiral. In this perpetual battlefield, Hamas justified its attacks as defensive war, while Israel portrayed its operations as existential necessity. Civilians bore the brunt, trapped in a conflict where daily life was hostage to geopolitics. Within this vortex, Mohisan's activities gained significance. He was not simply another militant, but a symbol of a generation forged by conflict without resolution. His story represented the wider struggle, a man shaped by siege, propelled by ideology, and hunted by one of the world's most formidable intelligence services. To understand his trajectory was to understand the enduring cycle of Gaza itself, a place where history never ends, only repeats in sharper, bloodier echoes. The elimination of Fahad Mohisan must be understood within the constellation of international positions that orbit the Gaza conflict. Israel viewed him as a lethal architect of violence, his tunnels described in Knesset briefings as arteries of terror. For Tel Aviv, his death was not revenge but preemptive defense, an act to sever the logistics that enabled kidnappings and rocket fire. Israeli intelligence pushed the narrative that his removal was essential to national security, ensuring global partners saw the strike not as escalation, but as necessity. Across the Middle East, positions fractured along familiar lines. Iran saw Mohisan as a proxy asset, a node in its network of influence stretching from Tehran to Beirut to Gaza. His logistical ties with Quds Force operatives made him valuable, and his death a blow. Tehran's state media mourned him as a martyr of resistance, using his image to fuel its rhetoric against Israel and its allies. Qatar and Turkey, frequent supporters of Hamas in diplomatic forums, condemned the operation, arguing it violated sovereignty and endangered fragile ceasefires. Cairo, however, maintained silence, its intelligence apparatus quietly relieved that one more destabilizing element had been removed from the volatile border it monitored. Western powers held carefully calibrated stances. The United States avoided direct condemnation, issuing statements about de-escalation while acknowledging Israel's right to defend itself. European governments split. Some criticized the use of clandestine tactics, while others saw in Mohisan's removal a potential opportunity to weaken Hamas's operational grip. Interpol, having tracked his smuggling routes, quietly closed files, its role ending not in courtroom justice, but in the shadows of extrajudicial resolution. These conflicting positions underscored the geopolitical chessboard surrounding Gaza. Each state saw Mohisan not as a man, but as a symbol. To some, he was a martyr. To others, a criminal mastermind. To Israel, a ticking bomb. His death was thus more than the elimination of a militant. It was a message broadcast across capitals, embassies, and intelligence corridors. In this message lay a deeper truth. Every act in Gaza resonates far beyond its borders, echoing through a region where alliances shift as quickly as the smoke of war. Fahad Mohisan mattered not only because of what he did, but because of what he represented. Within Hamas, he was more than an operative. He was an innovator who redefined tunnel warfare as both tactic and ideology. His engineering acumen transformed crude passageways into elaborate networks with chambers, ventilation, and storage sites capable of sustaining long-term operations. These tunnels became symbols of endurance, and Mohsen became their patron saint. In propaganda films, his name was invoked as proof that Gaza's resistance could outwit Israel's superior technology. For recruits, he embodied the idea that one man's obsession could alter the balance of a war. Internationally, Mohsen became a nexus of intelligence focus because his operations blurred the line between militancy and organized crime. Smuggling routes he built did not only carry weapons, but also cash, electronics, and contraband, and each shipment connected Gaza to broader networks in Egypt, Sudan, and Iran, making him both a military figure and a logistical broker. His kidnappings provided funds for Hamas's campaigns, while his assassinations reinforced the group's grip on internal loyalty. By merging militant violence with financial and technical sophistication, he elevated Hamas's capabilities in ways that troubled not only Israel, but its Western allies. Politically, Mohsen mattered because his survival symbolized Hamas's defiance. Despite drones, blockades, and targeted strikes, he continued to maneuver underground, eluding capture again and again. Every failure to eliminate him was a propaganda victory, strengthening Hamas's claim of divine protection and resilience. His myth fed the narrative that no matter how powerful Israel or its allies, the resistance could endure. For this reason, his eventual assassination was more than a tactical victory. It was a symbolic shattering of invincibility. Ultimately, Mohsen's significance lay in his ability to embody multiple roles simultaneously: engineer, smuggler, strategist, enforcer, and symbol. Few figures wove together the strands of ideology, logistics, and survival as seamlessly. His death would not end tunnel warfare or Hamas's resolve, but it would strike at the morale and mythology that sustained them. In the geopolitical theater of Gaza, that mattered as much as any battlefield gain. In early May 2022, a quiet influx of travelers passed through Ben Gurion Airport and onward into the border towns that framed Gaza. Among them were men and women carrying false passports from European and South American countries. Their cover identities were meticulously constructed: business consultants, humanitarian aid workers, and technicians for international firms. Each arrival appeared ordinary, yet behind the details lay Mossad operatives dispatched under aliases, their itineraries stitched together with precision. Every passport was layered with authentic entry stamps, every booking confirmed by legitimate agencies, creating a seamless facade impossible to unravel in casual inspection. The operatives dispersed strategically. Some checked into modest hotels in Ashkelon, blending with tourists along the Mediterranean coast. Others rented apartments near agricultural communities bordering Gaza, where transient laborers came and went unnoticed. Their luggage carried more than clothing. Hidden compartments contained encrypted devices, specialized cameras, and modular tools designed for field assembly. To outside eyes, they were travelers with laptops and notebooks, but within hours their rooms were converted into secure bases of surveillance. Each operative operated under strict compartmentalization. None knew the full plan, only fragments connected by encrypted transmissions from Tel Aviv. One cell focused on monitoring Hamas's financial couriers, another on mapping tunnel entry points, and a third on testing new aerial devices disguised as pigeons. For weeks, their presence remained undetected, their movements camouflaged in the bustle of border towns. Beneath the mundane rhythm of hotel check-ins and evening meals, Mossad's machine was assembling, piece by piece, to close in on a man believed untouchable. The hotels of Ashkelon and Sderot became silent staging grounds for Mossad's encirclement of Fahad Mohsen. Operatives checked in under unremarkable names, their rooms booked through third-party travel agencies to deflect suspicion. Each room soon transformed into a micro-laboratory of surveillance. Curtains drawn tight, laptops hummed with encrypted software, and cameras disguised as chargers pointed discreetly through slits in the blinds. Cleaning staff passed through without pause, never suspecting that beneath the bland decor, missions were being plotted with mathematical precision. Every hour, data was uploaded to a secure server in Tel Aviv, where analysts constructed a real-time map of Mohsin's subterranean world. The task was not merely to locate him, but to predict his movements, anticipating when he would surface, when he would retreat, and where he might be most vulnerable. Agents maintained the appearance of tourists and aid workers. Some strolled the boardwalks, others attended local cafes, their notebooks filled with codes instead of casual sketches. Surveillance extended into Gaza through assets planted inside. Paid informants and coerced collaborators relayed details, shifts of guards, deliveries of food, and sudden changes in routine that hinted at paranoia. Slowly, a portrait of Mohsin's schedule emerged. The tunnels no longer seemed impenetrable, they were mapped like veins on a scanned body. The hotels, unremarkable on the outside, had become the nerve centers of one of Mossad's most daring operations. On June 14, 2022, the day of reckoning began before sunrise. At 4:30, Mossad operatives stationed in Ashkelon received encrypted confirmation. Fahad Mohsin would be inspecting a southern tunnel branch near Rafah that evening. Hours of surveillance and months of intelligence distilled into a single window. Teams mobilized with silent efficiency, equipment packed into innocuous vans marked as construction vehicles. The Pigeon drone prototype, a small device resembling a common bird, was loaded into a reinforced case, its wings folded like the calm before flight. By late morning, Israeli reconnaissance drones circled Gaza's perimeter, masked as routine patrols. Informants inside Khan Yunis confirmed Mohsin's movement, noting that he traveled with only 2 guards to maintain secrecy. At 13:00, Mossad field agents tracked a supply truck entering the suspected tunnel shaft. The data aligned perfectly. Mohsin was moving underground. The operation clock began to tick. Throughout the afternoon, operatives synchronized their positions. One team staged near the border to provide real-time signals interception. Another, embedded within agricultural fields, prepared a launch pad for the Pigeon drone. A third unit managed communications from a safe house disguised as a charity office. At 17:45, confirmation came. Mohsin had entered the tunnel complex. His guards carried crates of supplies, unaware that their sanctuary was already under watch. As night fell, Gaza hummed with ordinary chaos. Families cooking, generators humming, distant gunfire echoing. Within the tunnels, however, silence pressed heavily. At 20:15, the Pigeon drone was released. Its wings flapped with uncanny realism as it glided toward the shaft opening, sensors locking onto faint heat trails. Deep inside, Mohsin paced the narrow corridor, inspecting ventilation shafts. He paused, unaware that above him, technology mimicking nature had already found him. By 21, Tel Aviv gave the final authorization. The drone descended silently, its belly carrying a microcharge designed for precision rather than destruction. Mossad operatives watched through encrypted feeds as it slipped into the shaft, fluttering into darkness. The world above remained still, but beneath the earth, history was about to turn. Mossad fused time-tested tradecraft with bespoke engineering to infiltrate subterranean labyrinths where Mohsin hid, combining patient surveillance, human intelligence, and mechanical artistry to transform ordinary objects into instruments of observation and coercion beneath Gaza's sleeping skin and quiet resolve. Locks and entry systems were defeated through replicated keys, forged electronic credentials, magnetic spoofing devices, and clandestine access routines, allowing teams to pass unnoticed through sealed doors while leaving no trace of tampering for adversaries to decipher or attribute silently. Poisons and incapacitating agents were deployed with surgical intent, concealed within food, ventilation ducts, and microdispensers, calibrated to mimic natural illness, delay symptoms, avoid forensic detection, and incapacitate targets while minimizing collateral casualties and political exposure over a prolonged time frame. Electronics were miniature and inconspicuous. Microcontrollers, pressure sensors, chemical detectors, and thermal arrays disguised as everyday tools transmitted encrypted bursts to analysts, producing 3-dimensional maps of corridors, chambers, and human movement without exposing operators to ground risk and remotely. The Pigeon drone was an exercise in biomimicry and stealth engineering, its feathers indistinguishable at distance, wings animated by silent actuators, navigation calibrated to thermal currents, and a sensor suite tuned to locate body heat and microventilation within tunnel mouths. The chosen microcharge prioritized precision over mass destruction, shaped charges and controlled deflagration, designed to collapse specific supports, induce asphyxiating conditions, and disorient occupants, rather than create visible surface carnage that would provoke immediate international scrutiny to limit global repercussions. Communications were controlled through burst transmissions, layered VPN relays, disposable satellite uplinks, and compartmentalized operational cells. No single operative retained the full picture, minimizing risk of compromise and ensuring that leaks could never fully unravel the plan at all times. False identities, forged travel documents, and curated cover stories supported hardware deployments. Logistics, hotel bookings, and supply chains were simulated through shell companies to sustain plausible deniability, while agents prepared for rapid extraction after the operation completed and contingency plans. Night air carried a false calm, as operatives watched screens, each heartbeat synced to distant feeds, every whisper magnified by monitors, and a single mistake could unravel months of planning into chaos beneath indifferent stars over Gaza. And resolve tightened. The pigeon drone descended like a myth, feathers flapping with engineered grace, tiny actuators humming invisibly, its thermal sensor locked on a faint signature. Operators exhaled in measured rhythm as it slipped into the shaft above where Mossad moved unaware. A stray dog barked nearby, a gardener paused under sodium lamps, and a maintenance truck rattled past the staging area. Contingency plans unfurled instantly. Agents adjusted timing, and the mission survived dozens small disruptions through practiced calm and austere precision. Inside the tunnel, lamps cast sickly halos, concrete walls absorbed every footstep, and Mossad paused to inspect a ventilation seam. The drone threaded narrow geometry, cameras capturing shots, sensors relaying breathing patterns, until the confirmation tone pulsed through encrypted channels. The microcharge detonated with disciplined brevity, structural supports yielded where intended. A controlled collapse induced suffocating smoke, and operatives watched telemetry as silence fell. Above ground life continued ignorant, while below, the subterranean order was irrevocably altered in seconds. Forever. The microcharge struck its precise mark deep within the shaft, collapsing a support beam and rupturing ventilation channels, producing choking smoke and a cascade of concrete dust that turned the corridor into an opaque tomb and sealed escape routes instantly. Mossad, caught amid falling rubble, inhaled burning dust and staggered, his lungs burning as he clawed at collapsed timber and rebar. His guards shouted futilely, their voices muffled by concrete. Within minutes, movement ceased, and a stunned quiet settled. From control rooms miles away, operators watched thermal feeds narrow to a single fading signature. Analysts matched pulse data to known profiles. No cheers followed, only solemn confirmation and cold reports of mission success sent through encrypted channels to headquarters. Above ground, Hamas fighters scrambled as sirens wailed and commanders ordered lockdowns. Families near tunnel entrances fled with children, choking on dust and fear. Propaganda units scrambled denials, while imams called for calm, their sermons threaded with righteous anger today. Within days, Hamas officials announced an inquiry while forensic teams worked under broadcast bans. International reactions were muted. Officials offered condemnations, and Mossad issued no statement. The death was entered into the dark ledger of espionage, as clandestine calculus indeed. The discovery of Mossad's body came not with ceremony, but with chaos and disbelief. 3 days after the collapse, Hamas rescue teams penetrated the blocked shaft, digging with crude machinery and bare hands. At a depth of 20 meters, they uncovered twisted rebar, shattered timber, and beneath it, his lifeless form. His face was coated in ash, his body bruised and lacerated, yet recognizable. Whispers spread through the tunnels before any official statement could be crafted. The lion of the depths was gone. Shock rippled through Gaza. Crowds gathered at hospitals where the remains were carried, chanting prayers and curses in equal measure. Fighters wept openly, while commanders muttered in disbelief that Mossad could be reached in the very sanctum he had built. Families whispered of betrayal, insisting no strike could have been so precise without inside knowledge. Hamas media outlets scrambled, releasing statements that alternated between denial, glorification, and fury. Outside Gaza, The discovery sent quiet waves. Israeli intelligence confirmed the recovery with silent satisfaction, analysts marking the file closed. Foreign embassies received terse reports, their language clinical. Target neutralized. Yet for the men who pulled Mohsen from the earth, the moment was heavy with irony. The tunnels he built to outlast death had become his grave. The autopsy of Fahad Mohsen unfolded under a shroud of secrecy inside a Gaza medical facility, attended only by Hamas-appointed doctors and guarded militants. His body bore signs of blunt trauma from collapsing concrete, lacerations along his chest and limbs, and lungs filled with dust and debris. The official cause of death was recorded as asphyxiation compounded by internal injuries. To Hamas supporters, this was framed as martyrdom, death by suffocation in the very tunnels that symbolized defiance. Yet whispers circulated of anomalies. Forensic technicians noted the unusual pattern of collapse, the precision of the damage, and residues on fragments of rebar inconsistent with natural cave-ins. Some suggested traces of shaped explosives. Hamas leadership quickly suppressed these findings, fearing they would confirm Mossad's hand. The narrative of martyrdom was simpler, more powerful, less demoralizing. Outside observers speculated quietly. European forensic analysts who later reviewed leaked reports suggested microcharges had been used, creating a localized implosion that trapped Mohsen without bringing down the entire tunnel system. Israeli officials, as always, neither confirmed nor denied involvement. The ambiguity was intentional. For intelligence services, the autopsy mattered less as science than as theater. It provided enough mystery to fuel legend, and enough silence to mask truth. In the weeks after Mohsen's death, whispers hardened into revelations. Leaked footage from border checkpoints and hotel lobbies revealed shadowy figures, foreign travelers who seemed ordinary, yet left behind irregularities in records. CCTV images showed men and women entering hotels in Ashkelon, some later vanishing without checkout. Their faces, captured in grainy resolution, bore uncanny resemblance to identities that unraveled under scrutiny. Palestinian investigators cross-referenced passports collected from various security sweeps. To their alarm, several matched real citizens of Britain, France, and Australia, individuals who later confirmed their documents had been stolen or forged. The scandal mirrored earlier Mossad operations, exposing a signature pattern: the use of cloned identities and forged passports to infiltrate unnoticed. International outrage brewed as governments summoned Israeli diplomats, demanding explanations. Yet denials followed, coupled with silence, and the storm subsided as quickly as it rose. For Hamas, the scandal was both humiliation and validation. It proved the operation bore Mossad's fingerprints, but it also confirmed betrayal. Questions arose. Who within Gaza had tipped off the Israelis? Was the pigeon drone guided by inside coordinates? Suspicion spread like wildfire, leading to interrogations, purges, and whispered accusations in safe houses and mosques alike. Trust within the ranks eroded. Globally, media outlets pieced together fragments of the story. Satellite images, leaked hotel logs, and contradictory diplomatic statements formed a tapestry of intrigue. The scandal deepened the aura of Mossad as a phantom bureaucracy capable of weaving identities, moving silently across borders, and leaving only confusion in its wake. For intelligence professionals, the message was chilling. Surveillance cameras might catch faces, but they could not capture the truth behind the masks. Global fallout from the death of Fahad Mohsen radiated far beyond Gaza's tunnels, touching capitals, embassies, and intelligence headquarters across continents. In Doha, Qatari officials accused Israel of sabotaging delicate ceasefire negotiations, arguing the strike endangered humanitarian aid channels. Ankara echoed condemnation, summoning Israel's ambassador while state media branded the operation a coward's assassination. Tehran seized the moment, declaring Mohsen a martyr of resistance and vowing that his blood will water the soil of Palestine. In Washington, reactions were cautious. The State Department issued statements urging calm, acknowledging Israel's right to self-defense, while quietly reviewing intelligence confirming Mossad's involvement. Within the Pentagon, analysts debated whether the operation signaled a new wave of covert warfare, where drone biomimicry and microcharges would become standard tools of 21st-century conflict. European capitals split in response. London and Paris protested the use of forged passports, while Berlin and Rome voiced muted support, arguing Hamas's destabilizing activities had long justified targeted eliminations. Inside Gaza, the political consequences were immediate. Hamas leaders sought to weaponize Mohsin's death in propaganda, but morale cracked under the weight of suspicion and fear. Fighters wondered how their sanctuary had been breached. Families whispered of betrayal within their own ranks. Recruitment slowed as paranoia thickened, forcing Hamas to divert energy from external attacks to internal purges. Diplomatic fallout also tested fragile alliances. Egypt tightened its border security, wary of being drawn into retaliation. The United Nations called for investigations, though no formal inquiry materialized. Mossad's silence remained absolute, its deniability ironclad. Yet the operation left an indelible mark. Governments saw firsthand that Israel could reach into the deepest tunnels of Gaza with precision, reshaping the calculus of risk. Behind the spectacle of Mohsin's elimination lay something larger, more unsettling: the phantom bureaucracy that orchestrated it. Mossad's victory was not the work of lone assassins, but the invisible machinery of an institution designed to operate in silence. Budgets hidden in parliamentary subcommittees, passports manufactured in shadow workshops, and orders written in language so cryptic that even intermediaries never glimpsed their true meaning. This bureaucracy thrived in anonymity, staffed by clerks who never carried guns, analysts who never set foot in Gaza, and engineers who never knew the names of the men they hunted. It functioned like an empire without borders, its reach woven into airlines, banks, hotels, and embassies. Decisions were made in sterile offices in Tel Aviv, yet their impact rippled into Gaza's tunnels, Doha's ministries, and Tehran's war rooms. To outsiders, Mossad seemed like a mythic entity, its agents shapeshifters, its files written in code. But in reality, it was a bureaucracy like any other, bound by hierarchies, paperwork, and routine. Its phantom quality lay in its invisibility, the way it erased itself, even while exerting power. This was the unsettling foundation of modern espionage: shadow empires governed not by kings or generals, but by administrators who weaponized procedure. And in the case of Fahad Mohsin, that machinery had sealed his fate long before the pigeon drone fluttered into his tunnel. Within that phantom bureaucracy lived the invisible legions, units whispered about in training manuals, but never acknowledged in daylight. These were not armies in uniform, but archetypes of modern espionage. Operatives sculpted into mythic silhouettes. Some were masters of disguise, able to vanish into the skin of aid workers, tourists, or merchants. Others specialized in surveillance, watching with patient eyes through hotel windows, constructing entire maps of lives from fragments of overheard conversations. There were engineers, mythologized as alchemists of death, transforming pigeons into drones, pens into weapons, and silence into detonations. There were handlers who never fired a shot, but pulled strings with dossiers and whispers, turning neighbors into informants and traitors into tools. These legions worked compartmentalized, never fully aware of the grand design, yet each fulfilling a role that stitched invisibility into dominance. Their anonymity was their armor. Names were erased, identities borrowed, footprints dissolved in forged documents. They were less soldiers than phantoms, designed to haunt rather than to be seen. In Gaza, their presence was felt but never proved, their shadows flickering behind the smoke of collapsed tunnels. They were the architects of inevitability, leaving no trail but legends. The story of Mohsin's death carried echoes of older missions, threads of a tapestry woven long before Gaza's tunnels became a battlefield. In 1960, Adolf Eichmann was snatched from a quiet Buenos Aires street, bundled into a car, and flown to Jerusalem for trial. In 1972, following the Munich Olympics massacre, Black September operatives were hunted across Europe, one by one, in hotels and apartments, their deaths staged as accidents or silenced by bullets in the night. In 1997, a failed poisoning in Amman exposed the same phantom bureaucracy. Agents disguised as Canadian tourists attempted to kill Khaled Mashal, a senior Hamas leader, using a toxin delivered through a device resembling an aerosol spray. The plot collapsed when Jordanian authorities intervened, forcing Israel into a humiliating trade for the captured agents. Yet even failure became part of the myth. The reach of Mossad was undeniable, even when its hand was caught. These echoes resurfaced with Mohissan. Each operation, whether Eichmann's capture, Munich's vengeance, or Meshal's poisoning, carried the same cinematic blend of patience, disguise, and ruthlessness. Each mission left questions unanswered. Who betrayed whom? What technology was deployed? What secrets remain buried in classified archives? The pigeon drone in Gaza was not an innovation born in isolation, but a continuation of that lineage. Mohissan's end was another vignette in a noir of espionage stretching across decades, a story left unresolved in the public eye, but complete in the hidden ledgers of intelligence. In the end, behind every phantom unit and every pigeon drone were the gods behind the curtain, leaders who signed orders with steady hands but sleepless eyes. Prime ministers, defense ministers, and intelligence chiefs, flawed men balancing survival against morality, power against restraint. They rarely saw the faces of their targets, yet they bore responsibility for the deaths. In their world, assassinations were not victories but transactions, weighed in cold calculus. Theirs was a pantheon of imperfect gods, orchestrating shadows, deciding who must vanish so the state might endure. Their choices carved silence into history, leaving blood where truth should be. The funeral of Fahad Mohissan unfolded under the blistering Gaza sun, a spectacle of grief and defiance. His body, wrapped in green banners of Hamas, was carried through Khan Yunis on the shoulders of militants and mourners alike. Gunfire cracked into the air. Chants of martyrdom echoed through alleyways, and children clutched posters bearing his likeness. The streets overflowed with thousands, their voices blending prayer with rage. For many, Mohissan's death was not an end, but a rallying cry, proof that resistance lived on even when its leaders were buried. Politically, the immediate impact was sharp. Hamas leaders seized the funeral as a stage, vowing vengeance and declaring Mohissan's blood would strengthen the struggle. Recruitment drives intensified, framed around his sacrifice, while rival factions sought to capitalize on the vacuum left by his absence. Internationally, footage of the funeral circulated rapidly. Arab channels depicted a martyr, Israeli outlets portrayed a terrorist neutralized, and Western media framed the moment as another turn in Gaza's endless cycle. For Gaza's civilians, the funeral meant another season of uncertainty. Few doubted that reprisals, raids, and renewed clashes would soon follow. In the charged silence after the burial, Gaza braced for what came next. In the months that followed Mohissan's burial, the long-term consequences of his death began to take shape. Within Hamas, his absence created fractures. Tunnel operations lost their architect, smuggling routes faltered, and rival commanders jostled for influence. The once centralized network became vulnerable to internal mistrust and external infiltration. Younger militants, once inspired by his aura of invincibility, now whispered doubts about their leader's ability to protect them. Regionally, his death reverberated through alliances. Iran mourned him as a fallen asset, but shifted resources toward other figures, signaling that individuals, however skilled, were replaceable in the machinery of proxy warfare. Israel, emboldened by the success, expanded surveillance of other mid-tier commanders, proving that even those beneath the radar were not beyond reach. Diplomatically, Arab mediators struggled to maintain fragile ceasefires, their negotiations complicated by an atmosphere of vengeance and suspicion. For Gaza's civilians, the consequences were stark. Crackdowns intensified as Hamas searched for suspected informants, often punishing innocents in their paranoia. Economic life, already strangled, slowed further under new blockades imposed in response to retaliatory rocket fire. Mohissan's death, intended as a surgical strike, instead fed the endless spiral of retaliation, leaving the region once again trembling on the edge of another conflagration. In the end, Fahad Mohissan's death changed little in the grand scheme of geopolitics. The tunnel still ran beneath Gaza, rockets still arced across the sky, and diplomacy still faltered on familiar divides. Yet his assassination revealed a hidden world, where states sanctioned killers, where drones mimicked birds, and where bureaucracies pulled strings from silent offices. It was a reminder that in modern conflict, truth is not merely elusive, it is buried deliberately. Mohsin's fall was not just a story of one man's fate, but a glimpse into the machinery of power that thrives in shadows.